welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author, the debut author of an absolutely gorgeous piece of historical fiction set in a time period with which you are familiar, but told from a really unique perspective and at the intersection of two very interesting cultures. And I'm so excited for this conversation. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jen. My name's Angela Shupe, and my debut historical novel is called In the Light of the Sun. And it takes place, as you said, in a couple locations in the Philippines and in Italy during World War II, which is kind of unique. And it's specifically about it's a story of two sisters, both who are aspiring sopranos. And the youngest sister is in the Philippines, just about to pursue her dream of being able to go to Italy and voice train there when the Japanese bombed the U.S. air bases near her home in Florida Blanca. And her family is forced to flee their home. They end up going into the mountainous jungles in Luzon to seek refuge at her aunt and uncle's home. And unfortunately, they are unable to outrun the war. And Caramina comes face to face with living under the very, very savage and brutal occupation of the Japanese military. And at the same time, her older sister Rosa is in Florence, finishing up her voice studies and about to debut professionally as a soprano. And she's kind of dealing with the paradox of the opulence of the Florentine opera scene, as well as living under the heavy hand of Mussolini and his henchmen, the black shirts. And when Germany declares war on Italy and the Nazis march into the city, she starts becoming suspicious that those that she is closest to are hiding things, that they're keeping secrets from her. And she has to make a decision as to whether or not she wants to, help the resistance essentially and help in the fight against not just the Nazis, but Mussolini and his regime. And she'll end up having to make a very, very difficult decision at the end, one that is of, a life and death decision regarding someone that she loves the most. So, and it is inspired by my family's story, by my mom's story and her sisters. My mom grew up in the Philippines, and she did actually have an older sister who indeed moved to Italy with their grandmother to voice train there. So, and was there during the war. So, yeah.
It's such a fascinating story, and I have so many questions about, yeah, the links to your family history and fictionalizing your own family history. But before we get to that, I'd love to just ask about your writing career in general and some of your other works. Before this novel, what have you been writing and working on?
So this is my first novel. And prior to this, I did some freelance writing, writing some articles and essays. And then I had the idea for this. Really, I kind of carried it around with me for I feel like most of my life, honestly. But I was working on short stories as well. Prior to this, I was trying to, I think, build the confidence that I could go ahead and actually put this into novel form. So short stories, personal essays, that kind of thing. That's where I was centering my writing for the
Nice.
most part. So yeah.
And I'm curious about like what does short stories teach you about like how does it prepare you for writing a novel? And then what are the sort of unexpected challenges that come up when you are approaching a new form?
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously, writing a novel is a whole different beast, right? It's very, very different. And I would say doing the work, the number of the number of years I spent writing short stories and sending them out for publication. I did have some that were published. It does teach you it helps teach you the craft of writing. You're learning about story, you're learning dialogue, how to use even like having, subplots. There, there's just a lot. There's a lot you're learning with craft. It is very obviously very different than writing a novel, which you need a lot more content. The story has to be much broader, And I wasn't really. I I grew up hearing stories told from my mom and my aunts about their time in the Philippines, as well as my aunt who went to Italy during the war, and kind of carried those stories with me and always thought they would, just they were so captivating to me. And I thought it was such a beautiful, their whole story, their family story was just beautiful in that it inspired me that you can live through some very, very difficult circumstances and end up still living a very full life and very joyfully. And that's what I watched. That's what I saw them doing. But I didn't know if everything that I had was enough for a novel. So, doing the short stories certainly helped me enormously. And in fact, a workshop that I had participated in, which was a fiction workshop, it was for short stories. The gentleman that ran it, his name was Janos Shumyan. He's a Hungarian man. He has since passed. But he was a World War II survivor as well. He grew up in Hungary or lived in Hungary during that time. And anyway, he knew we kind of kept in contact a little bit after that workshop. And he, I would say, was kind of instrumental in encouraging me to go ahead and actually sit down and try to put this into novel form. He kind of kept asking me, what is it that you really want to do, Angela? And I told him, and he said, "Go for it." So I did.
Nice.
Yes.
The best teachers don't really like tell you what you want to do, but they kind of help you discover what it is that you want to do. I think that sounds really lovely.
Yes, yeah, yeah. His encouragement really meant a lot to me because I think I didn't really have the confidence that I could do it, and the fact that he believed in me and encouraged me to go ahead and move forward really, really, it really said a lot, and it did encourage me. So yeah.
So I'd love to ask about the origins of this story. From what I understand, you began researching it in 2012. So I'm curious
Yes.
about what that research was like, both into your own family story, as you've mentioned, and into the time period, which I imagine, you have to look at two very sort of different sets of documents and sources if you're in those two areas. So yeah, what did your research look like?
Yeah, you're right. That is correct. I did start doing some research back in 2012 and just kind of inched my way into it. I was apparently very slow to believe that, hey, let me do this. But anyway, I did I will let you know, my mom sadly had Alzheimer's and she had it for many, many years. And there kind of came a point in that where um I think as I wasn't able to, she wasn't able to share as much with me. I wanted to know more about her life and just personally as well, and ended up talking to my aunts, her older sister. She was the youngest of four, and just asking them about their lives again. I mean, the stories that I had were from when I was young, when I was a kid, essentially. And so I went to them and just, asked them. I essentially put together a questionnaire, like an interview type thing, and ended up talking with them through it. And as well as my godmother, I have a godmother who I'm not related to by blood, but she, like my mom and her sisters, grew up in the Philippines during the war. Um, and just interviewed them about their experiences, which was, and sadly, they are all no longer with us. They have all passed, but they were so kind. And I also was very concerned asking them questions because I knew enough to know that, this was a very tender and raw subject. And, they may not be willing to share those memories. They may not want to do that. But they were very open, and in fact, they actually, um, two of them actually thanked me for for doing that and giving them the opportunity to kind of reminisce about their family, the good times, I think, So I did that. And then, and I'll let you know, Jen, I started out essentially researching what happened in the Philippines. The second, the Rosa's narrative in the book, the older sister's narrative, I didn't add that until later, after I had already written the Filipino narrative. And so I did it, which I think probably helped me because I think it would have been just unbelievably overwhelming trying to do both at the same time. So, yeah, so I focused on the Philippines and did everything I could. I have a couple books here that I were kind of instrumental in my research. I delved into so many firsthand accounts, memoirs of other people who were young, children during that time and during the war in the Philippines, soldiers. There were two memoirs from female journalists that actually were part Filipina that one of them ended up fighting alongside in a guerrilla troop essentially and became kind of second in command. It was fascinating memoir. Her name is Ye Penlilio, and that was just amazing. That was a fascinating story. But I did that. I watched documentaries. I mean, anything I could find, I just tried to glean as much as I could. And that took several years. And then I sat down to writing, a first draft. And along the way, after I had done that, I always had in the back of my mind the idea for the Rosa narrative, potentially for another manuscript, but ended up making the decision to put it into the book, weave it into this narrative, to have a more mature voice in the book. So I had started doing kind of where, there was kind of a break. I would finish, a draft and then I started working with an editor just to, go over it and get some feedback. And so at that point, I started doing a little bit of research into the Italian narrative as well and the history there. But yeah, and then it was a while after that when I made the decision to add that narrative, then I dove into that research and did a lot of research about music under Mussolini, under his regime, which there is a book by, I believe I think it's Harvey Sachs. I have it here. Yes, I think that's right. Music in Fascist Italy. And I heard a lot about that from my aunts actually growing up about what happened and um, how just, he, how Mussolini really, um, his reach was into everything, even in the music world. And so someone who was a foreigner in the music world there wasn't really accepted. And in fact, a lot of, you could be arrested or jailed for listening to foreign music under Mussolini. So I did a lot of research with that. I did a lot of research with the Italian resistance as well, and specifically women's role in the resistance. And there were quite a few women who participated. I think there were approximately, I think it's about 100,000 women that participated in the Italian resistance overall in different capacities, and then just researched the war in general there also. So, and it was, I mean, I love research, so it was really fascinating. But
It sounds like a really fascinating process. And I'm, most curious about, working on something that is like where you have to take a sort of global or international perspective on your story, and then also have it be so intimate, like drawing on your own family history and telling the story of, your legacy, your family's legacy. Um, in terms of like fictionalizing your family history,
yes.
how do you know where to um relate things accurately or tell like the quote unquote like real truth? And where do you get creative and pepper in the fiction? I'm just curious about, not so much like, oh, this part was true or this one wasn't, but like how do you make that decision as a writer?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen. And I think for me, obviously this is my first book. So, and I had a lot of, stories and anecdotes specifically about what happened, to my mom and her family when they were in the Philippines. And so because of that, I mean, everything essentially that they gave me, I put into the book. Um, I mean, I will say, like, there are a couple things that they mentioned that I'm not sure they happen necessarily during the war. Like, there's kind of a charming scene where their father sings to this. He doesn't sing to them, but he hears them and then he sings something that I just thought was really just very charming and very heartwarming and just gave me a good. I never met my grandfather, their dad, unfortunately, and he just sounded like a wonderful man, but he had a good sense of humor. And anyway, I don't know that that necessarily happened specifically during the war, but it happened throughout their lives. And so, as an example, I put that in. Um, and what I didn't know, in order to make it actually, a full story, I had to draw from the memoirs that I read as well. So it really is, I mean, like you're saying, peppering in um, the other fictional elements really is to tie the story together, I think. Um, I drew from those memoirs, and there are things that it's funny. My husband, he acts as a first reader for me, and he's so wonderful because he's read so many drafts of the book. But you know, there's so many things that you can add in, and some of them aren't even necessarily believable. Like if you were, it's funny, they say truth is stranger. I know that sounds so cliche. Truth is stranger than fiction. Well, yes, it definitely is. So, and then I would say on Rosa's narrative, in the Italian narrative, I knew less about her time there. What I did know about it, I put that in, but I had to really fictionalize, you know, the story. But again, I drew from the memoirs that I read and the research that I had. So I think you fictionalize where it's necessary for the story's sake. That's how I feel. That's, it was absolutely necessary to do that because you simply don't have enough, material to fill in everything, so at least maybe other historical fiction authors are fortunate enough to have that, but in my case that was not the case. So
That's super interesting, and I really liked your point about sort of including that moment about your grandfather singing, because there are kind of like two different truths that we're talking about. Like one is like the truth of events and like what things happened in what order. But then there's sort of like that truth of everyday life that were just like these little moments that really just sort of are emblematic, I guess, of like larger ideas about like how you remember your family or relationships, stuff like that. Like, yeah, it just feels like very um authentic in a way that I think like it is what like, fiction can bring to history in historical fiction.
yeah, that's a really good way to put that, I think. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I'd love to talk about finding your characters' voices, because we get the perspectives, as you said, of both Caramina and Rosa. Um, how do you go about finding their voices? Like, and how do you distinguish them? Yeah, I think you really see it because there is like an element of the novel that is epistolary, like they write letters to each other, which is
Mhm.
like how the only way that they could interact really while separated by, oceans. Um, yeah, as a writer, like how do you find the voices of your perspective characters?
So I would say it's kind of a mix, Jen. I'm thinking about, I mean, obviously you're asking me specifically about the novel. I'm thinking about in some of the short stories that I wrote as well. Um, I think it held true with some of the characters in the novel, um, where it's going to sound a little crazy, I think, but sometimes they just, they just come to me, and I have a good idea of who they are, and I guess their personality and their voice. So, in some instances, that's the case. Um, in in the light of the sun, because it was obviously inspired by my mom's family story. For the two protagonists, the two main characters, Caramina and Rosa, I really drew upon, um, what I knew of their my aunts and my mom. What I knew of their personalities, and um, I will say my aunt who did end up going to Italy and was there during the war, who was voice training there. My memories of her when I was younger, and even talking to her as an adult, she she carried herself. She was older than my mom, and she carried herself with kind of, I don't know how else to describe it. I was talking about this with my husband, but she just kind of had this confidence and sophistication, but she was very warm and very loving. Um, but it I there was something there that, what she experienced during the war, it was very clear, it was a very um, difficult time, which understandably. And and with Caramina, I'll just say, I haven't said this, but really, when I set out to write this story, I really wanted to honor my mom and her family as well. So, and Caramina really draws a lot of inspiration from my mom. And because she was the youngest of the girls, and I would watch them, on family visits together, you kind of see that, you kind of see the personality. And, she was very warm, very loving, very nurturing. I don't want to say naive, because I don't think she was naive. She just kind of had a sense of wonder. And it was funny. I mean, I think back to, like, even when they were much older, and her older sisters still kind of treated her like the baby, a little bit of the family. And but she had a lot of strength and a lot of spunk, and just but lived with a lot of wonder too, I think. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think I kind of, some of the other characters are composites of varying people, and that's true even with the two protagonists. But yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Yeah, you did. I was very curious about, how you like how much of like, imagining the younger voice of a voice that you're very familiar with goes into it. But like from what you were saying, it's like that sort of thing about how, we all regress around our families a little bit. Like we fall into like the old dynamics and become a little bit more immature or naive, as you're saying. So I think
yeah,
you got
yeah.
to experience it a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, I really am loving this book so much, and I can't wait to finish it and to recommend it to all of our patrons
Oh,
when it comes
thank
out.
you.
You're very welcome. What
Wow.
are you working on now? What's on your horizon?
Well, right now I am in the middle of doing some research for another story. And I'm kind of working, I'm kind of at the beginning of the research. So, but hope I'm not planning on having it take as long as it did for this book. So, but it would be based. It's inspired by a family story as well, and it actually would kind of take one of the characters from In the Light of the Sun and expand on their story. It's not a sequel. By any means, but it would be taking one of the characters and kind of expanding on their story. So I'm busy doing that, as well as just this. This is so wonderful getting to talk to you. I truly appreciate it, Jen. This is wonderful, and yeah, doing stuff like this right now for In the Light of the Sun. So
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule. Um,
absolutely.
oh, I really appreciate it. And yeah, happy research, happy writing. We can't wait to see what you do
Thank
next.
you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. This has been such a pleasure. I really appreciate it, Jen. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, listeners, it's your turn now. Please check out In the Light of the Sun. As you hear this, it will be out in the world, so head to your favorite bookstore or library or website, wherever you like to go for books. All right, it's time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
it's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.